Hello, this is JFL, John Francis Leader, and welcome to the Body, Mind, Self podcast. So my guest today is Nikki Lannen. Nikki, welcome to the Body, Mind, Self podcast. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
So I've met you on, I suppose you'd call it the VR circuit. It's an interesting one because with a virtual reality interest, it seems to come people from all kinds of different backgrounds with different goals. But maybe to set the scene, how would you introduce yourself? Who are you? Where'd you come from? What do you want to do?
So my name's Nikki Lannen. I'm the CEO and founder of Warducks. We're a virtual reality studio based here in Dublin. My background is I worked for Facebook for almost 5 years. And then following that, I left and set up Warducks. I also run the Irish VR meetup group, which is a coming together of anyone interested in virtual reality or augmented reality. And then on top of that, I also run the Virtual Reality Ireland Facebook group. So I'd be quite immersed in the virtual reality space, I suppose.
That leads to the question, why, of all things you could be interested in, what is it that's captivated you?
Well, Warducks was initially a game studio, so we built a Facebook and mobile game initially. And then we realised that, the mobile space is quite crowded and it's very, very difficult. We obviously experimented with virtual reality. We realised there was a huge opportunity there. And so we pivoted into that space because it made sense for us as a studio.
Yeah, and it's a kind of a massive topic, and I suppose it's so massive a topic, it's hard to define. I'm thinking that 5-10 years from now, it'll be much easier to look back and define it to some degree. Yeah, it seems to be so emerging at the moment in terms of what's happening.
It really is.
For any listeners who aren't 100% clear on what virtual reality is, how would you set the scene?
Well, I mean, I suppose it's a virtual space. So you pop on a headset and then you're immersed in this virtual space. So whatever content it is that you're locked into, you really feel like you're part of that environment. And I suppose that's the best way to describe it. It's very, very immersive. So, you can get very caught up in where you are. And we have nothing like that to date. It's the first product that's allowed for that.
And so when it comes to developing for that and to just even thinking about it creatively, how does that differ from anything else, any other type of game or experience? What is it like as a process, have you found?
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. It is kind of more like a movie production, I suppose, than developing for the mobile space or desktop space. You have to take a number of factors into account, like, where the sound is coming from. So if something happens on the right-hand side of you need to make sure the player hears that sound from that area. And then other things like music. Music's very important. Right. We have a very strong virtual reality composer. And just very environmental things are very, very important. You can't take like a mobile product and just slot it on to VR because it just won't work. So whereas in the past you saw a lot of desktop games worked on mobile, this is a very, very different space.
Right. And what are the consequences of that in terms of the types of things that you're going to develop? Because it does seem all right that some types of concepts, even traditional concepts that mightn't have even been computerized, offline things like theater or things like film, as you mentioned, might work, but other things might not work that easily at all. What is that like when you're thinking about a title? Yeah,
it's interesting. I mean, it's a new space, so a lot of it is testing, exploring items that will work and things that won't work. Some things that you think will work won't work. So you do have to test and create prototypes and kind of see what's working in that space and what isn't. It's very, very new at the moment. So.
And from what you were saying there, it sounds very, very, I suppose all processes should be, but it sounds very user focused, as in you're thinking about this participant there in that world, what's happening in relation to them in every given moment. Other types of game design might have been more about levels and platforms and things, and the user is not really the point. They're just a bit on the screen, I suppose, that relates to it.
Yeah.
What happens when you start to put the user in? How do you get inside the person's mind, I suppose, and how do you position? It sounds like method acting or something like that you're doing as a developer.
Yeah. So for us, like it is all about testing. So, you know, you do have to create a prototype. You have to allow the user to experience it. You have to get testers in that like aren't gamers, are gamers, and you have to get them to try it out and give honest feedback. The honest feedback part is difficult because a lot of people don't want to really be honest or criticize things. But for us as a studio, it's very, very important for people to give us what they feel would improve the game or what they feel they would like to be doing in that environment. It's very important.
How do you find that kind of feedback? Not the friends and family who, I don't know if they'd love it or hate it, but or the people who hate everything. What is that like?
It's good. It's good. It's for us, like we love getting feedback. So any sort of feedback that we get, we actually discuss it internally. We see whether it's something that we could change within the game, because often if one person feels it, you know, many people will feel that same way. There's a game called Job Simulator. I don't know if you've heard of them, Alchemy Studios, but they developed a very, very strong game. But it's literally like you're doing like little jobs, like, you know, you're given tasks. You're kind of like in this kind of like animated environment. And you know, they said that through testing they realized that people wanted to do things that they weren't supposed to do. So for example, put their head down on the photocopier, you know, and things like that. So they made tweaks based on the response that their testers had, you know, the feedback that the testers had given them. And then they learned a lot from that process. And that game has actually made $3 million in its first few months. So it actually was very, very successful. But all of their development was based on feedback.
Right.
Yeah.
And this, I know, for all creative people is a difficult thing. I'm thinking about writers, I'm thinking about musicians who have, I suppose, a body of work. And the question is, at what point is this finished? At what point does this get released?
Yeah.
Obviously, an editor might push it, or there has to be a point where you go, okay, that's it, and now let me move on to the next story. And, you know, somebody like Stephen King might keep themes going throughout his work, but at the same time, there's a point where it stops.
Yeah.
Games or interactive experiences are strange in that, in principle, that feedback could be updates, it can change, it can be malleable in that way. And of course, you're never going to have the resources to get it exactly as you want it. You could always still do something with it. What's that like in terms of a process, finding those lines?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose you could keep tweaking anything. So there's kind of like a joke within the games industry that it's, you know, you're never going to get your product perfect in your eyes because there's just so much that you can continue doing in every level. For us, like, we try and give ourselves deadlines and points where we know that we could have a solid product ready, and then just work really hard up to that date. Obviously, that date could potentially move a little based on, you know, last minute things, but we do try and kind of reach that hard deadline, because you can just continue working on something based on feedback forever.
And a lot of people, it seems, are, as a result, kind of giving up on trying to get a finished product complete and kind of going for open worlds and going for add-ons and going for things that build. Is that going to happen more and more, or is that the easy way out to try it?
Yeah, I don't know. I think it'll depend on the project. So you're just gonna, you know, it's gonna vary from project to project and the you know, the scale of the project, I suppose.
Because there is a flavour to things too. I can kind of imagine anyone, U2 or whoever, saying this album, not quite right. But then if they keep waiting long enough, it'll become a different album. And they probably would have cycled through all their albums.
Exactly.
And now they'll be here in 2017, isn't it? We kind of need things to make a mark in time. Yeah,
exactly. Too. And like with virtual reality, I feel as well, there is an opportunity there based on the amount of content that's there right now. So you really are trying to get like a, you know, very solid content out, but relatively quickly. So viewer projects take a long time. They require a lot of work in terms of art, animation, you know, storytelling, music, sound design. Like it's quite a big production. So if you spend a long time tweaking things and changing things, it becomes a much longer and bigger project, which probably isn't to your advantage, to be honest.
How much of that is, do you think, because of the infancy of it as a technology, how much of the workflow is going to be addressed, I suppose, so that there's still going to be lots to do, but you can actually get down to that creative part rather than just trying to invent the wheel to begin with?
Yeah, I don't know. I think with VR, a lot of the time you are kind of inventing the wheel anyway, because a lot of stuff just hasn't been done yet.
Right.
And like we don't know what audiences' reactions are to certain things.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of it that is kind of like, risky, I suppose, in terms of like trying to get out something that people will like. What we do is you do see certain trends within the VR industry, and we do try and take use cases that have been successful and then, bring them back in somehow into what we're creating to kind of eliminating that.
So the user base for something like this is potentially broad. How do you think about that? How do you go about saying, okay, well, whatever about feedback, but this is who I'm trying to reach?
So we kind of know who the VR users are right now, and it's early adopters. So it's people that are interested in tech, people who will invest in desktop VR in particular. So those devices, they will be investing like, maybe 1,800 euros between a PC and the actual device. So they are like very, very interested in tech. They're early adopters. So, you kind of know that audience right now, but as we're seeing VR grow, that audience is going to become broader and broader. On the flip side of that, mobile VR has a much broader audience because cardboards, which are €10, were purchased, there's millions of those out. And then also the Samsung Gear VR, there is 6 million of those in the market.
Right.
Who is using them regularly? We don't really know what the demographic of that person is. But again, I would imagine it's that kind of early adopter, interested in tech sort of audience.
And because that's part of it as well, is as you talk about these different platforms, some of which are desktop based, but some of which are more than desktop based. If we think about like the HTC Vive, it's room scale, and it's worse than desktop based in terms of the commitments you need to really make it run well. Or as you say, something like Samsung Gear VR on the other hand, which is just very portable and very much to hand. How do you think about that in terms of development? Because, of course, mobile gaming in and of itself has really changed the game so much in terms of needing to stop and start and doing it in buses and so many people using it, while commuting versus, a similar thing we used to have, I suppose, with desktop gaming, isn't it? Console gaming. So where does, at the moment at least, VR fit in on that, and where might it be going?
Yeah, so it's interesting. I think there is definitely two different, there's been two different brackets created, I suppose. So it's desktop VR and mobile VR. Mobile VR is restrictive because you don't have the capacity on a mobile phone to have like very, very high-end art assets. You just don't have a lot of the strength that a desktop computer would have to drive the actual content. So you are quite restricted on mobile VR, but then it is more portable and there is a lot more of them out there. With desktop VR, the price point is obviously a big blocker for people, but the content is a lot more high quality. So personally, I think desktop VR is probably going to drive VR a little bit more because it is just that it's so much better than mobile VR. It's so much more high quality. So I do believe that desktop VR will drive it. On the flip side of that, desktop VR, the price points need to come down, and then we need to see them more accessible. So you shouldn't have to buy a very, very high-end PC to have desktop VR. We have seen some announcements that will help with that. So Oculus are going to, they announced they were bringing down their price point, but also it will be you'll be able to use it with a laptop, for example, and that will be a big advantage to people. So it's just about waiting it out. I think we will see growth in both sides, mobile and desktop. But I think personally that desktop will drive it a little bit more. Yeah.
Because from, in terms of mobile gaming and how common that's become, and you just need to get on any bus or any train and, really see the degree to which it's caught on. Is it practical in any way to use VR on a bus or on a train? Is that going to happen ever? Or for that very reason, are we going to be indoors in a room anyway? So we might as well have the high quality stuff.
I think people are kind of like self-conscious about using VR in public spaces right now, just because it's not as widespread. And,
sure.
It does, I used it in an airport. I was demoing our game to someone in an airport, and a lot of people were staring 100%. But I feel like when it does, we see it become more widespread and more people have them, I don't think it will draw as much attention. I definitely don't. But in saying that, it isn't something we need to be mobile, I don't think.
Okay.
It's very immersive.
Yeah.
So to be doing it in a public place, I don't know if that's ideal.
Yeah.
The advantage with mobile VR is it's portable.
Right.
So if you're going away for a night to a hotel, you could bring it with you or whatever that might be. That is a very large advantage. I think probably in the end there will be a room for both. So people will have their very high-end desktop VR device in their homes, but then they will, all the new mobile phones are going to be VR compatible. So they will potentially have a mobile VR kit that they will bring when they travel. But I think in the end, there will probably be a place for both. But I think desktop VR will be the most prominent.
Having set the scene then of VR and what's going on there as a kind of a container to deliver an experience or a narrative within, how do you think about narrative? How do you think about engaging the user? I was looking at some old 1980s computer games there and their simplicity and charm, of course, as well at the same time. And things have gotten, of course, a lot more complicated or sophisticated, depending on what way you want to look at it in terms of the amount of assets and content and stuff that's just there in an experience. So obviously narrative, for want of an elegant definition, is that thing that pulls all that stuff together, all these different assets and things that are happening in sequence. How do you think about narrative yourself and your process, and to what degree does VR then play into the narrative much? Yeah,
so I think VR storytelling is really what you're talking about. Yeah, so I think there's been a lot of attention drawn to VR storytelling because it's a very different environment. It's something very new. I think it can be done very well, but the way we look at it is again through testing. So we do what we think will work, and then we get other people just to test and give their feedback on whether it's coming through on the other side or whether we can see what's going on there. But it's an interesting space because it's a new way of doing things. It's a new way of providing a story there.
The more or less can be given in the experience. You can have a kind of a more 360 video type thing where you're literally watching a documentary essentially, which is pros and cons to it. You can have something far more abstract, which can still be very emotive and very evocative in its own way, and then of course you can have things being VR and not being VR. In terms of the story or in terms of drawing things in, because, even those 80s games I was talking about, they have a story. It'd usually be tacked on the end quite crudely, but still there's a story, still there's something going on. How do the user feedback, of course, is very important in this in terms of shaping it and making sure it's hitting its mark. But from almost like a filmmaking or a storyboarding point of view, how do you approach that when you're designing something? Yeah, we do quite a number of things actually. So we normally brainstorm out a concept to begin with, then we storyboard it out and we write out a script. With games, it's interesting because you create a game design document.
So we actually hired Brian Upton, who's a PlayStation game designer, to work with us on that. And he helped us create our core narrative. Because obviously you want to make sure that it appeals to that audience.
Yeah.
And then we created something very, very detailed. So it kind of, I suppose, dictated the whole narrative throughout the whole way, throughout the whole game, and how that would all come together at the end. And then we still discuss it the whole time. So, for example, on Friday, we went through the whole narrative and spoke about, did it work? Was it clear to the player? We potentially may have to make some tweaks at the end, but we it'll be constantly revised and edited right the way up to the end of the project.
So you'll get some sort of a story arc together, essentially, and then break it down into bits.
Because that's the thing with VR; it's so new that you need to make sure that it still works. So it's something that looks really nice on paper and looks very clear. May not be clear when you're in that environment. So you just need to make sure that it is very clear to the player what's going on.
There seems to be a danger in many forms of storytelling, whether it's VR or anything else, in I suppose giving the participant too much as well. In other words, this sort of push and pull between how much you're drawing their imagination in versus showing it all in front of them. And I don't think it really needs to be one or the other. There's obviously better and worse ways of using any tool. How does, I suppose specifically to VR, but generally in any of the experiences you're creating, how do you think about that question? The classic thing, of course, is when the film or the book comes out, and all the book people are very disappointed because they've kind of invested in their imagination already.
I know. How
much work do you get the user to do, I suppose, and how much do you give them?
Yeah, again, it's all about testing. I mean, the interesting thing about narrative is it can draw a lot of attention. So you're trying to retain your players and trying to keep them coming back and keep them, hopefully they'll enjoy the whole game. So they will have to come back a number of times to finish the game. So for us, it's all about making sure that there's enough there to entice them to come back. So you're kind of adding little bits and bobs to make sure, they have some sort of emotional draw to what you've created.
Can you draw on from anything you have developed or are developing, any kind of examples of what that was like?
Yeah, sure. So we have a game called Sneaky Bears, which we launched on the Samsung Gear VR and cardboard. And a
fascinating combination of kind of cute and terror, isn't it?
It is. So that game has done pretty well, and it came to, I think it was number 28 in the top selling on the Samsung Gear VR. And what we did in that game is we had a strong narrative with an evil teddy bear who had taken over a teddy bear factory, and you had to go. He was sending all his evil teddy bears after you, and you had to go and basically annihilate all of them. It's kind of like a point and click. So with that, we had little bits and bobs of the narrative coming as you went through the levels, and then obviously you get to an end level where you have to meet the evil bear. So you're kind of just seeing the evil bear on a screen throughout, and then finally you meet the evil bear at the end and you have to defeat him. We launched another game called Sneaky Bears Roller Coaster, which was kind of an add-on to that IP, and that actually reached number 2 in the top selling on the Samsung Gear VR, which was fantastic. We were one behind Minecraft, so we were delighted with that. And that game, it's more of an experience. So it's literally just a roller coaster around the factory. So there's very little narrative, for example, in that title. It's just kind of was an add-on to the Sneaky Bears brand. The game that we're working on at the moment is Sneaky Bears, which is for PlayStation VR, Oculus Rift and HTC Vive to begin with. But it's a much more lengthy version of those original titles. So we realised on mobile VR that there was an appetite for those sort of games. The feedback has been really strong. We've had really positive media attention around those titles. So we knew that we could actually invest in creating something a lot more in-depth and lengthy for the more advanced VR hardware. And so that's the game we're going to launch in May. But the story with that and the narrative throughout is much more lengthy. There's a lot more strategy. we're going after the PlayStation VR player who would probably demand quite a bit more in terms of gameplay, etc. So we have lengthened out the story quite substantially for that.
So where do ideas like this come from? You see that in the App Store and go, well, that obviously was waiting to be made.
Yeah,
it's successful. It's great. It's fun.
Yeah.
But why? Where did that come from?
Yeah, like the team we have is amazing. So we do a lot of brainstorming. We actually really enjoy VR. So we play a lot of VR in the office. And so the whole concept initially came from, us just brainstorming. And then again, it was just, talking back and forth, lengthening out the story. Keith, one of our developers, really enjoys, storytelling and writing. And he wrote out the initial concept piece. And then again, we got this Brian Upton, this ex-PlayStation game designer, to do something a little bit more detailed for us. So it all came together in the end. But it was good for us to have the test case of using the mobile VR platform for finding out, before we invested heavily in desktop VR, that the concept is something that people love and something that they're really engaged with.
And is it, from the creative point of view and putting that together and making decisions on it, was bounding your options easy? I mean, did it inevitably kind of go that direction after? I'm sure you had to work through it, but did it go that way, or was it forking off in different directions as a creative process?
Yeah, I mean, so I suppose it goes different ways. It kind of swings and roundabouts. So, you do find that things can go a certain direction and then you have to pull them back.
Yeah, sure.
And again, that's all based on testing for us.
Hopefully not after you've drawn up all your assets to the highest degree.
Exactly. You really have to be very careful that everything that you do is something that people enjoy. And that's the thing with VR. So it's all about testing. And before you invest too heavily in something that you think will be amazing, you have to ensure that for the actual end user, that experience is amazing.
I'm thinking of that old, in therapy and psychology, that whole life purpose model that's used, which is that, something as big as your life purpose is, nobody should be telling it to you, even if they knew what it was. It's for you to find for yourself.
Yeah.
But it tends to involve a combination of three big factors. One is, what are you actually good at? So I suppose from a game development point of view, what are you skilled in developing, isn't it? There's going to be some types of projects you're going to be more equipped to work on than others. So that's skill. And the other one then is passion, which is what do you love? What do you enjoy doing? So obviously some things you might be very skilled at developing, but you're not interested in them as titles at all. So it's going to be hard to muster that energy to keep going.
Yes.
But then the third one in the Venn diagram is, well, what do people need? So I suppose that's the end user, isn't it? What are they out there looking for?
Yeah.
So it sounds like from what you're saying, you've clearly got the skill in that kind of development, and you do seem to enjoy that type of game.
Yeah.
In terms of the third bit, the end user, obviously the problem with that one is there's country music fans, there's rock fans, there's people who like house music, there's a lot of groups out there.
Sure. Yeah.
Is your audience clear when you take your skill and your passion into account, or do you have to make a decision on your audience at a certain point?
Yeah, I think with VR it's pretty easy because, as I said, it's like that early adopter audience. So your audience is kind of defined, and you have to make sure that the testers you use are that demographic, I suppose.
Okay.
But yeah, you I think for now we are clear on our audience. It is something you do have to take into account when you're creating concepts and when you're thinking things through. For us, reaching that early adopter audience, we had to make sure that whatever content we created was correct for that audience and that it would appeal to them.
If we kind of fast forward into the future and these early adopters are out of the way, they're still there, of course, but they're the vast minority because this thing is ubiquitous. It's out there. It's everywhere. The barriers for access are gone, essentially.
Yeah.
So there's a big user base.
Yeah.
What's that going to look like, do you think, in terms of design or even trying to target?
Yeah. So it'll be the same as games. So, you will choose what audience your demographic of your first games are going to be indicative of what you actually create in the future. So for us, you know, I imagine we will be going after that type of audience going forward. The game we have is very casual, so it's extremely animated, it's extremely casual. It actually does appeal probably to a broad audience, as in it would appeal to you know, teenagers, millennials, and I think, you know, both male and female.
Right.
So that in that regard, we're very lucky, and you'll see that with some of the more casual kind of like PlayStation games or anything like that. They reach quite a broad demographic. So I suppose that's what we will do going forward, and that's who we'll try and reach.
Do you feel a bit more existentially satisfied now that you've gone down this road a bit? Because that's put some kind of parameters in place, which I suppose bounds your creativity in a good way, isn't it? Lets you think within a space rather than just...
Yeah, 100%. I mean, for us, the fact that we were able to create 2 hit titles on Samsung Gear VR really, really stands to us, because it shows that we have a strong team. It shows that we are creating content that people are going to enjoy. And even for us as a team, like, you know, it definitely has created a lot of confidence in the office, a lot of enthusiasm, and we feel like we're in a really, really good place at the moment, for sure.
Well, it does, because it seems to reflect back to that point of skill, passion, and you know, user need in that sense. Because one thing I see whenever I see you guys demonstrate or any media attention, the passion clearly is in place. There's a joy in what you do. That seems to be, it's an interesting one, because I don't think, well, hopefully not in 2017, I don't think we still have a Victorian kind of industrial revolution notion of work. I think we at least get it can be interesting, but we still think, oh, well, it's hard to make it interesting, or I almost feel a bit guilty if it is too interesting. Am I working hard enough? You do seem to have a playfulness, and I'm sure there's very, very hard long days as well. But there does seem to be some heart in it behind it. Would that be fair to say?
Definitely. We have the most amazing team. It's actually great. We have a really, really nice atmosphere in the office. And we're doing what we love, I suppose. So everyone wants to, you know, that generates a lot of momentum. And everyone's kind of just enjoying the success that we're having right now, and hopefully we'll have in the future. So we're excited right now. We're excited to see what comes down the line. We're excited about VR. And we're excited that we're going to be launching a game on PSVR. So we're in a very good place.
And that love and that passion meeting the harsh reality of business and deadlines and practicality, how do they play together?
They play pretty well. I think when you're in a good working environment, it's a lot easier to do that sort of thing. So, I mean, for us, you know, if we have a deadline, we talk about it internally. And we decide how we're going to get it done. So, you know, there's no, you know, as a team, we come together and we get it done. There's no kind of, you know, there's no one standing over the guys saying that, you know, you have to stay here till 12 o'clock at night. They do that organically. So we have a very, very good vibe in the office. And I think it actually, it creates this really nice environment where people are happy to put in the effort to create solid content and to get it out in time.
As you develop now for multiple platforms and it's sort of onwards and upwards, how is that going to change things for you, do you think, or how has it changed things so far? Yeah,
it's good because we're learning a lot more. Our experience, obviously, we're becoming a much more experienced team. And as I said, we're definitely gaining confidence as we go along. And things are getting quicker, you know, as you learn more. You know what works and what doesn't work, and it puts you in a much better place to be creating really, really solid, good quality content, which is what we want to do. We want to just be able to create really, really good, enjoyable content for VR, and we've also created a little bit of AR as well. So we're open to kind of exploring that area as it unfolds, I suppose.
Well, that was my next question, because we've certainly jumped into VR. If we talk about AR, augmented reality, how would we position that for somebody who doesn't know what augmented reality is and maybe only recently has learned what virtual reality is?
Yeah, so augmented reality is I suppose the easiest way to describe it is Pokemon Go.
That's what I did in my last podcast video.
But looking through your mobile phone and seeing virtual things in the real world, I suppose. I think augmented reality will be really big, but it's all coming down the line. So we did create a AR version of Sneaky Bears where it was like whack-a-mole. So you place your mobile phone and you had to like hit the bears as they came out of your desk, for example.
Great.
So I think there is a huge opportunity there for creating like nice fun experiences on AR as well. And it's not as immersive, so it potentially is more accessible to people. I think there'll be a place for both. AR is very good in business related cases, and we're seeing it being used a lot there. So I think there will be a place in both going forward.
And this is where it gets psychological and even philosophical, isn't it, on a certain level? Because when we say something is or isn't immersive, it's an interesting thing. And it seems to tie back to this point of imagination and engaging it we were talking about before. Because, of course, one of the ultimate classic virtual reality systems we have is a book, isn't it? In that sense, that, it's black text on white paper. That's the input as such. Yeah. And if you think about the experience you're having when you read a good book, if people do that anymore, but the experience is phenomenal, isn't it? It's this rich multi-sensory experience, yet that's all that's there. So it's weird because it's immersive, but it's not like a VR headset is giving you the visual experience, the auditory experience. This is, we could say it's augmented reality in terms of its display, because you've still got the world in front of you in the book. But of course, you're not even seeing any of it. It's kind of sending your imagination inward in that sense. Yeah. So it does get kind of complicated, doesn't it, when we think about what is immersive and what isn't. Something that is augmented could potentially be very immersive. Yes. Something that's a VR experience, if not suitably engaging, mightn't be that immersive. We might be thinking about what's going on outside it.
Yes, I suppose you're right, actually.
These are massive questions, and I don't, it's going to take 1,000 years at least. Yes. I think Socrates was working on these, so we're not there just yet. Yeah. But at least on a practical level, if not on a psychological or philosophical level, how do we think about this, do you think? Because, so far, I suppose there's been these two different trends. We've called it AR, augmented reality, VR, virtual reality. One obvious path seems to be things like HoloLens, and I think we can certainly envisage a time, isn't it, where there's degrees of transparency and there's sort of full VR, and then there's less of it. Yeah. What does that mean in any shape or form for when we're trying to develop experiences, or how we're even just thinking about the technology? Yeah,
so it's difficult to tell, it is difficult to tell where things are going and what's going to come down the line. I think at the moment, you're right, they are kind of like separated. So, you have virtual reality, you have augmented reality. There is this mixed reality space, which is similar to augmented reality. And so, the future, there's a lot of hardware and there's a lot of devices coming down the road. And we'll see how things evolve. But I think it should be interesting. I think there'll be interesting times ahead. I think the technology is just getting way more advanced. I think this year we'll see a lot more releases. There's definitely a lot more coming out in the VR space and the AR space. And so we will see what will come down the line. But I don't know exactly where it's going to go. It's going to be very, very interesting to see.
It seems a safe bet might be to be very, very content focused, isn't it? And get that right, but be willing to adapt it as we need to.
Yes, exactly. I think so as well. It's important that we have high quality content as well, really enjoyable content. Because as the hardware does evolve, if the content isn't matching that hardware, there's a bit of an issue. Because people aren't really, excited about buying the hardware and investing in the hardware unless there's content to match that. So it's a time when, both need to be progressing quite substantially.
Yeah, because the fad happens, doesn't it, when it's just overly constrained by just one iteration of a technology.
Yeah. Yes.
That doesn't need to be the case.
Exactly.
And I mean, good storytelling is something that never goes out of date.
Exactly, yes.
But of course, the exciting difference, I suppose, is the interaction, isn't it? Because I suppose there's interactive theatre and things like that where, people come off the stage or walk around you, but certainly a lot of the media we've come accustomed to, film and things like that, have been rather passive in a sense. They've kind of captured an experience to some degree.
Yes.
But actually throwing people in the middle of it seems to be the fundamental difference.
Totally, yes.
On the point of the augmentation, the mobile uses of augmentation, that would seem to lend itself much more readily. It would seem like we'd want the augmentation a lot while wandering about compared to the VR.
Yes, 100%. I mean, it is a lot mobile. It's a lot more mobile. It's something you can do very, very easily. So yes, 100% it would.
If you were to give advice, I suppose, because I'm conscious a lot of the types of people who listen to things like this are people who are kind of inspired in this area, interested in this idea. Maybe they're just getting into it, or maybe they've been at it a while, but they've got some ideas and they want to get into it in some shape or form in terms of it could be development, it could be games, it could be experiences, it could be really anything. I suppose there's a few people, so there might be slightly different advice for each of them, but from your experience and learning in this, do you have any good advice to anybody who wants to get into developing or really exploring this area more?
Yeah, come to the Irish VR and 3D Camp meetup.
Yeah.
So the meetup that we run is actually in conjunction with 3D Camp. So the two of us had separate meetups and we brought them both together. Mm-hmm. So it's very large. It's like 160 people at each event. And you'll just see people demoing what they're doing. People really share. That's the only way that Ireland in any way is going to be on the map in terms of VR AR, is through sharing and speaking to each other and communicating, and being able to help each other in the space. So that was the role of the meetup. And I have to say, if anyone is thinking of getting into that space, it's the ideal place to talk, bounce your idea off people in the industry that know what they're talking about, whether it's possible, how much it would cost. People are very, very willing and able to give advice in this space. So, so I'd highly recommend that. And they happen every 2 months. And it's just in the evening for like 2 or 3 hours. So, so anyone interested in this space should definitely go to one of those.
What type of advice are they likely to get? What would you say if somebody came to your door and said, "Look, I want to get into developing"? What's some of your wisdom?
So I think it's very important to speak to people in the industry to realize all of the elements that you need to account for. So things like sound design, things like music, things like animation and art, all of these different parts of the jigsaw need to be looked at individually. So I think just making sure that you can provide in all of those areas is very, very important. But it's always dependent on the project. Like, it could be a project that isn't actually that difficult in some of those elements. So it's if I honestly think if someone has an idea, they should just speak to someone in the industry who would know. And
I think you're very right in what you say and what you were saying a moment ago about 3D Camp, because just the collection of people together with so many different backgrounds and such wisdom, it's amazing that it can do in minutes what you probably couldn't do in years by yourself, isn't it? To shave off all the misconceptions and also really encourage you in a particular way too. Because the barrier, it's a great thing in many ways, but the barrier to entry, of course, has become so much lower. I mean, if you think about game development, if you're trying to do that and, again, talking about the 80s again, trying to build cartridges and, things like this, some very, very serious engineering challenges. Now, literally anybody can download Unity and, put something together if they're willing to, watch some tutorials. So that's really exciting and really encouraging. But of course, as with anything like that, it can kind of lower the standards a bit sometimes.
Yes.
What do you think about the standards?
I think there's a mix. So I think there is some very, very high quality content. And then obviously, as with anything, there can be some low quality content. But there's definitely a mix there. I think a lot of the hardware manufacturers are being careful what they allow available to people, because you don't want people to have a bad experience and not come back to VR.
Yeah.
So I think there is some restrictions, probably not as much on mobile as there is on VR. But again, you know, I suppose the way to combat that is getting feedback from people, and if there's areas that you need to improve in your product, maybe investing in those areas, or speaking to Enterprise Ireland or someone like that who would potentially be able to help you to scale enough to get some resources available to you.
Motion sickness is one practical point, of course, which you know, everybody's trying to address in one shape or form. But you know, as experience design gets better, as equipment gets better, it does seem to be happening to some degree. I certainly can speak from personal experience in trying earlier demos and you know, DK1 or DK2 Oculus Rift, that I certainly feel very different now, and part of it may be me just getting accustomed to it, but oh my gosh, that was rough in the early days.
I know.
So it is getting there, but part of it is the technology in that sense, and just the physiology, how it works together.
Yeah.
But part of it's the content as well. This is, I suppose, an emerging topic that we're still exploring as a community, but horror games are, of course, one very obvious example of that. We had Keith Barry on, and we stuck him in the Brookhaven experiment, and there was, you know, people shooting at him and grabbing him from each side, you know, in terms of zombies. And when you start to develop this type of content, yours is interesting because it falls between both categories, I suppose. Again, the cute and the sinister are both being accounted for. But there's a responsibility with that. What are your reflections on that as a...
Yeah, I think, okay, we were very conscious of nausea from the beginning, because, you know, it is not a nice feeling when you feel nauseous from a title. I actually demoed something there last week, and I actually felt sick for a good hour after it, and it was horrible. But, you know, that is something that you need to take into account. There's a lot of ways to eliminate nausea, and that's why it's good for new developers to talk to people in the industry. So there's a lot of ways where you don't have to have like rapid movement or things like that. Our second game, obviously the roller coaster, can cause nausea with some people, but most people who get nausea in VR don't do roller coasters.
Right. Good point.
I mean, it's
in the real world too.
In the small print underneath it.
Does that help? Because I know some research on having a fixed carriage that you're in, like the cars and things like that, can be helpful.
Does help. Like we did add elements. I mean, I don't get nauseous from Sneaky Bear's roller coaster, and in fact, you know, there is other games that cause a lot more nausea, which wouldn't be as fast as our game. So we did use a lot of tricks to try and eliminate nausea with it. But, you know, there is constantly, your inner ear is saying, you know, Jesus, you know, you're still, and then your mind is saying, no, I'm moving. So there's this kind of like combat, and then you start to feel a little bit sick. So there is ways to definitely eliminate it, and it's something we've been very conscious of in the development of our new game. So, like, you know, we don't want any nausea at all, obviously, in that title.
And beyond the physiological into the psychological, what about packaging sheer emotional terror and experiences? That seemed okay when it was a platform game. Yeah. As we get more and more immersive, and God, I've played some scary stuff. What was that Haunted Mine one I was trying and Vive the other day, and oh my God, these things coming at me, and you can certainly really feel it. Yeah, you totally can. Do we need to be concerned over that or not?
I don't know. Like, again, I think any scary titles, people go into it knowing that it's going to scare them, and they're marketed as such. Our game really isn't scary. It's kind of funny and quirky. There is a sinister vibe to it, definitely.
But that's the fun bit, isn't it?
Yes, exactly. But there isn't really anything scary in it. Yeah. And we actually, one of the guys in the office is very afraid of scariness in VR.
He's your test go-to person.
Exactly. So he's actually barred us from creating any sort of horror titles. But I think there is definitely a genre within VR, which is horror, and, like, you know, people using VR for one of the first times, that scare factor is kind of like a good thing to do, because it just shows how immersive the platform is. But again, I think it's a genre, and I think people either go and market their title as such, and then people know what they're entering into. I think it would be cruel to just be like, oh, this is a really fun game, and then have someone jump out of you.
Well, that does seem to be the point, doesn't it?
Yes.
There does seem to be a way in which consent is needed, and you can
Yes.
appropriately inform that.
Exactly.
And genres and games, I suppose, have developed relatively clearly.
Yeah.
VR, particularly in terms of experiences, it's a bit more tricky.
Yeah.
Like particularly for us, because in terms of therapeutic development, genres don't really make sense there. You've got experiences of different types, and the other thing is, are they going to be used with or without a therapist there as well,
Yes.
accompanying and moderating the experience? So,
Yeah.
at least what you're doing, you're packaging it, and you kind of know what you're sending out there,
Exactly.
I suppose.
It does what it says in the tin.
Some of these, phobia treatment programs, there's literally sliding scales for scariness in
Yeah.
real time that you can play with, and you don't accidentally knock one of those,
Oh, gosh. Yeah,
at the wrong time.
Absolutely.
So you presumably you've obviously got your staff to test, but you have, I suppose, a range in mind as to what you're trying to hit. Is it in terms of a comfort level or scariness level?
Yeah, we're not creating anything scary, I suppose, and we don't want to make people nauseous. Like, that's not what we're out to do. So I think for us, we're just looking to create engaging, fun content for people to experience in VR, and also have like kind of fun gameplay throughout. So like the PlayStation VR game has a lot more strategy to it. And it's about just trying to think of things that are fun to do in that environment and then making them come to life,
Right.
which is a really nice place to be and a really nice thing to be able to do.
So another thing on this point that's interesting is the definition of what a game is. And this has become more in question, I suppose, because as this notion of gamification develops, which, seems to be making things fun to do again.
Yeah.
It's a bit like how we teach kids things, isn't
Yeah,
it? Basically,
I know.
just
Yeah.
don't have to do it in a boring, sit down, serious
Exactly.
way, but have a bit of fun doing it. It starts to get a bit trickier, doesn't it, to define what a game is exactly.
Yeah.
Now, we probably still have polls. We can say roughly a game is this and roughly this thing isn't a game.
Yeah.
But the reason why it seems to be tricky is because the attitude towards the thing seems to be as important as the thing itself.
Yeah.
There's plenty of things. Like if you had to, deal with sneaky bears for a living, if this was a real world phenomena
Yeah.
that you had to deal with,
Yeah.
and, you went into work 9 to 5 every day and you had to address this as an issue, that mightn't be a game anymore.
Yeah,
That would
I
just be
know.
work. And then somebody else, of course, would be the most joyful, fun thing to do. But of course,
Yeah.
if you're a firefighter for a living, that might be a job. But then somebody loves to play a firefighter for a few hours, and that's the most fun thing in the world to do.
Yeah.
What is a game anymore? Are we post-game in any shape or form? Or what do you think?
So I think, I think a game is anything that has any kind of like gameplay in it. So I think gamification is like, there's a really nice way of educating, especially the younger generation, through these kind of like game orientated ways, or just creating some fun to some sort of educational piece.
Yeah.
But I do think that there's a large space for games. People really enjoy games.
Yeah.
A lot of games, I suppose, have some advantages. Like our first game was a Facebook and mobile game called Global Agents, and so not VR.
Yeah.
And so it was a hidden object game, and we still get emails of people with dementia saying it's really, really helping them
Wow.
to remember things, and they'd be going back into scenes and seeing things again. That's actually really nice.
That's really nice.
And we didn't create the game with that in mind, whereas that was just something that came about from
Very
the
nice.
actual gameplay in the title. So I think things like that, it can be like a side product of games without even realizing it. You can have some advantages to people, using strategy or using their mind to do something within a game environment. And that becomes a little bit more fun.
It's something you appreciate in the therapeutic use of experiential learning.
Yeah.
Is that, therapy isn't, a room with a person there and an hour of talking.
Yeah.
It's an experience. It
Yeah.
can be walking down the street and seeing something. It can be a film. It can
Yeah.
be a game. And
Yeah.
this is interesting, isn't it? Because as the two overlap, you can really bring about some very powerful changes in people's life through
really
the
can.
media that you develop.
Yeah.
How much, you're obviously intending that anyway in the narratives and the storytelling you're doing. You're, I'm sure, trying to hit certain emotions.
Yeah.
Do you think at all beyond that? Do you think about the Alzheimer's? Do you think about overcoming fear? Do you think about those as aims?
I think VR is an ideal platform to do good things in the health space. I definitely think there is a lot of advantages to VR in terms of people that struggle to meditate, or people, maybe so kids probably shouldn't really be using VR as of yet, but I do think even the younger generation, just being in certain environments and getting a little bit of escapism,
yes,
I think is very, very important, and it's a really, really nice way to do that. We've got a big issue these days with anxiety in children, and a lot of anxiety in I suppose it's a fast driven or fast-paced life we lead, and that has repercussions. So having taking the time to put on a virtual reality kit and sitting and concentrating on something else,
a real mindfulness in it, can
have really, really good health benefits. So I think there is a lot that VR can do in the medical space. And I think, whether it's through games, because games are an escapism as well, or whether it's through actual proper meditation experiences, there is a lot that can be done there.
And I think you're right to distinguish those two things, because I'm sure they're on a poll, they inevitably must be, but it's very important, I think, that we do distinguish them, because there's a notion that, okay, if we want to develop for therapeutic purposes, that we need to make that very explicit.
Yeah.
But what you're saying there, I think, is very, very important, that the game, which doesn't make out to be therapy in any shape or form, but nonetheless is very therapeutic to experience, is at least as important as the formal learning.
Yes.
We don't have to, it doesn't have to be, okay, here's a lesson, we're going to sit down and learn now.
Yeah.
That's not the point.
Yeah.
The point is to draw out certain emotion, to kind of stretch certain kind of cognitive muscles in certain ways.
Exactly.
And you're whether you ever say you're going to do that or not, you're actually very well placed to do that.
Yes, 100%.
And that would be the hope, I suppose, is that as a result, therapy in a very broad sense with a small t gets actually very big, very, very big, because everybody's working on it.
They are, 100%.
There's real room for collaboration there.
Yeah, there really is.
As we think about the gamification and the boundaries between work and play, drawing down, the other point we were making is the equipment distinctions vary as well. The technology starts to kind of disappear to some shape or form as well.
Yeah.
We've gamified serious learning, and then we've also kind of disappeared the technology to some degree. How does that fit in terms of work-life balance, in terms of even work ethic? This notion of going to a factory to work and there's the machine and then you come home and then that's it, finished. It seems to me a bit like the iPhone has your camera on it and it has everything else on it too. It seems that everything is just merging together. So work is becoming fun. And, fun is, maybe being thought about strategically. It's blending together.
Yeah.
What do you think about that in terms of work-life balance as technologies merge?
Yeah, I think it's good. Listen, I think the more enjoyable your work environment is, the better. People spend more time in work, I suppose, than anywhere else. So if we're able to make things a little bit easier, it's less stressful on people. And I think it's more, people are enjoying their lives a lot more. So I think anything we can do in terms of doing that, I think, is an advantage, to be honest. And I think it's nice. Like, it's nice for people to be able to, not have to maybe sit down with a book for an hour and be able to do something in a different format. It adds variety. And when it's something new, people are more excited about it and it becomes more enjoyable for that person, which makes a happier person. And that's obviously got a lot of advantages to having a happier, environment, I suppose.
Well, it's going to happen anyway, whether we like it or not, so we might as well navigate it well.
Exactly, yes.
So as we draw to a close, if you rewind back any number of years that you wish, back to a younger Nikki back then, and you've obviously picked up a thing or two along the way in terms of insight and from the experiences you've had. Is there one kind of bit of knowledge or one insight that really stands out for you from your learning along the way? You'd either give the younger you or you give anybody else listening. What is your big learning, do you think?
I think for me, the big learning that I've had is when I was at Facebook and I was thinking about setting up my own business.
Yeah.
Just, I thought about it for a long time. And I always say, and it's like the Nike slogan, but I always say, just do it. If you have a concept, if you think it's strong enough, obviously make sure you have a solid business case. Don't everyone hand in their notice. But, you know, just make sure you have a strong business case. But if you think you can do it, you should give it a shot, because especially when you're younger, it's probably the only chance that you have to do something like that. So I always say, just if you feel like you have a solid concept that you think would do well, be it in VR, be it in AR, be it in anything else, you should just go for it.
Mm-hmm. And as we were discussing, the barriers to entry have been lower than they ever have before, isn't it? It's not that you had to mortgage your house or anything to do it. It's a different world in that sense.
And Ireland is great because, you know, there's a lot of support mechanisms there. People share a lot.
Yeah.
People really want to support each other. Enterprise Ireland are fantastic. They really, really help young startups and they want people to scale. So there's a lot of support there for people that are starting their businesses. So even to start having those conversations with some of those, you know, those support mechanisms that are there, that is really beneficial.
It's true. And this is back to your point about 3D Camp and about just that community, that sense of getting together. Because it's amazing how, you know, how skilled we can be in some ways and how, you know, hopelessly incompetent in other ways.
Yes.
And that's okay. That's called individuality, isn't it?
Yeah, sure.
You know, we're literally not the same.
I know. And everyone has questions, you know, like some of the questions I've asked, you know, you do need to, if you're new in a space, you have questions, and that's, for you, they might be difficult to source an answer, but from asking someone else in the industry, you might have a response in 2 seconds that really, really makes sense to you.
Yeah.
So, you know, people shouldn't be shy about asking questions if they're looking for more information.
Skills and resources, and it's funny as well how you're not really asking for favors as well, because the thing you have, the other person needs, they have the thing that you need, and it's just a complete win-win in many cases. It's not a zero-sum game when it comes to collaboration.
Exactly, and we're trying to build, you know, a network of, you know, tech and VR and AR companies here. So, you know, from you asking questions and getting help means you're joining that network and strengthening the group. So
it's a win-win.
It's a win-win, definitely.
Wonderful. If anybody wants to follow up on you and what you're doing and your exciting current and future projects, what's the best way for them to keep in touch?
So the best way to keep in touch would be to look at our website, which is warducks.com, or also we have a Facebook page. And then also to attend the Irish VR and 3D Camp meetups. So you can just find them on meetup.com.
Wonderful. Well, listen, Nikki, it's been fabulous having you on the Body, Mind, Self podcast.
Thanks.
Thank you for being here, and talk again soon.
Definitely. Thank you.
Thank you.